We covered that huge NAR lawsuit back in December, and there has been a settlement. Big news for the National Association of Realtors. They've agreed to pay $418 million in a settlement last week. And a federal jury found that the NAR and several large real estate brokerages conspired to artificially inflate agent commissions. The settlement is pretty big deal. People are freaking out about it. As you know, the seller of a home pays the buyer's agent's commission. So you have a buyer and a seller, 6% fee, typically, sometimes it's 5%, but they split that 3% to the buyer and the seller, but the seller is paying that 3% to the buyer. Now that can't be listed in the MLS anymore, and that deal cannot be done ahead of time. Buyers are responsible for paying their agents' commissions going forward. So if you bought $1 million house and you were the buyer, you would pay $30,000 to your buyer's agent, or you would choose to not have an agent, or you would choose to negotiate it. And you have to have a signed contract. This is a crazy, just shocking shock to the system, according to most people who are in it. I've seen a lot of real estate folks who are saying this is going to be healthy because you have to have this conversation between the buyer's agent and the buyer. But commissions in the United States are $100 billion a year. And one analyst projected the lawsuit could lead to a 30% reduction in commission payments. And that would eliminate about half of the 1.6 million active NRA members from the industry. You had a lot of feelings on this, Friedberg, when we talked about it a couple of months ago. What are your thoughts on this settlement? Is anything going to change? Is this as groundbreaking and shocking as people seem to think it is?
Well, I would take this settlement along with a lot of the developments and advances in AI as being the moment of catalyzing real change in the residential real estate agency industry. It's an industry that's been known to have fixed pricing and be very expensive to consumers, a real tax on the system. And it's largely been wrapped around this idea of mitigating your liability, reducing risk, servicing the customer. Many of those aspects over the last couple of years have been largely standardized through forms, digitized because so much of this information is no longer going to get paperwork from the courthouse, but a lot of the information sits digitally and can be accessed in a democratized way. And the fact that so much of the service and discovery, reading through documents, understanding what they mean and what they say can be automated through AI and LLMs. Much of this is kind of coalescing around what I hope and expect will be a more seamless, automated, direct marketplace for consumers. The challenge is that most consumers put most of their personal net worth into their home. And so it is where most people's net worth is tied up. And so because it is such a sensitive investment and it is their entire savings, they want to have a trusted advisor by them. So it's going to take some time before that trusted advisor becomes some piece of software. But I do think that software is going to play more and more of a role in providing advisory tools and services to consumers in this transaction marketplace. And that's only going to catalyze and accelerate the fee reduction. I do project and I do expect that much of what is charged on a commission basis, on a percent of home value today, will change to being a fixed fee and a flat fee basis.
So $5K, $10K for your buyer's agent.
Different services. So you can have someone do
a la carte.
Do the disclosure diligence for me for $5K. Negotiate the purchase for me for $10K. And you as a consumer will start to pick from a menu of the services that you want to have rendered for you and things that you're comfortable doing yourself. I don't need someone to negotiate price. I don't need someone to find me a home. I've got Redfin. I can go do that. I can arrange open houses on my own. The lockbox is there. I'll go walk around the property. I don't need someone to point out that the color is nice in a room. And so I think that there's elements of what will happen here, which is a fragmentation and then an automation of these services. And as a result, significant fee reduction. And I'm in the middle of doing this myself right now with a piece of real estate where I'm not using an agent. And I've been using a direct listing service. I've used all of these standard forms. There's a lot of AI tools you can use to kind of read all the disclosures for you, make sure everything's copacetic. And these escrow agents, they'll handle a lot of what a lawyer will handle. And they'll get paid a fee, which is much less than the agent's fees. So I do think that there's a big disruption happening in this industry. I think it's really important for consumers. Agents are going to be, hands in the air telling you this is ridiculous. You need someone to help you. You need an advisor. That will continue for a good chunk of the market for a very long period of time. But I do think that it's for the benefit of consumers over time to see these fees come out of the system and see those savings go back into consumers' pockets, and for the value of their real estate to go in their pockets, not into an agent's pocket.
Is it going to change the profitability of a realtor pretty meaningfully, right?
Most realtors won't be able to be in business.
Right.
I think
The sellers will do fine, and they might capture more of it because they'll. My understanding is the seller will maybe do both sides of the transaction.
no, that's not what's going to happen. And there's also going to be limits on that. But here's what I will say. If you look at the number of people, there are 1.4 million members of NAR today, the National Association of Realtors. If you look at the distribution of earnings, you guys know this. My guess is probably 10% of those realtors make 40% of the fee income or 50% of the fee income. That there's a
Pareto
long
principle.
tail.
Yeah.
So there's probably a third of those folks who are already kind of sub living standards in terms of income. Maybe half of them won't be able to make enough money in this new, fee regime that it'll no longer be an attractive proposition to be a real estate agent for maybe 500,000 to 1 million people over time that are agents today.
Yeah, it's interesting. The sellers are going to be faced with buyers who just show up having seen something on Redfin and don't have a buyer's representation. And so they think, from the stuff I've been reading, that the seller's agent might be pointing them to, hey, go to these services, and be acting as like one broker, essentially representing both sides. That's what people are saying is the potential downside.
I don't think
of
that's
this.
that's not going to happen for a couple of reasons. But let me ask you guys a question. If you guys wanted to go buy a new house, currently you just go, sign up an agent or a buyer's agent, and they go walk with you, and eventually they'll get paid by the seller's agent. So now you have to negotiate a fee with them up front. Would you negotiate a fee and say to a buyer's agent, hey, I'll pay you 2% of whatever home I buy? Would you be comfortable doing that, or 3% or 4%? How would you have that conversation?
No,
What would you say, Sax? I mean, I know you've got a different situation because you've got real estate people like working for you, but like if you were to go out would you go out and get an agent and pay and negotiate a fee with them?
It is not worth it to the buyer to pay 2 to 3% of the purchase price to make appointments. You can see all the houses on MLS through Zillow or Redfin or whatever.
And what about handling closing and disclosures?
No buyer would ever voluntarily agree to pay this massive commission. It's not worth it. So it's game over for the realtors if buyers are forced to pay their own broker's commission. The only reason this system works is because the seller is forced to pay for it.
Yep.
And when you sign the listing agreement with the seller's agent, you can negotiate a little bit at the margins. Sometimes you can get the 6% down to 4 to 5% for a big listing, but 50% of it will always go to the buy side. I mean, I've said to these guys, the buy side agent doesn't do anything. Why don't you make it 2% for yourself and 1% for the buyer? They won't do that.
They just won't take your business. The seller will not represent you.
They have like all sorts of rules against it. So the whole thing is like it's like a racket that's protected
And
somehow.
now it's been cracked. Yeah.
Well, I still am like a little bit skeptical that this is going to work out exactly the way we're saying, because it is just such a death blow to the industry if buyers are forced to pay their own commissions, their own buy-side broker's commission. And in the articles, they're saying there's still like some gray area about what's going to happen, but that is what should happen. Buyers should be responsible for paying their own brokers. And if you do that, I think you'll knock out half the fees of this industry.
Here's an idea. Why don't they charge an hourly fee as a buyer's agent? Like
there will be people doing that, Jake.
$200 an hour, $300 an hour.
Doesn't this impact home prices as well? Like if the buyer had to pay, all of a sudden their affordability effectively goes down, because if they have to pay an extra $100,000 for a home, then that's $100,000 they can't pay, less than they can pay for the house itself, because they have to pay an agent. So
but
it all comes back into home prices, no?
It nets out because the seller's agent's no longer paying 6%, they're paying 3%. And so now the seller's agent has 3% more that they'll take
your net's the same.
Yeah, but net.
I think it's good for buyers and sellers because the transaction costs of trading go down.
Exactly. The money goes back in consumers' pockets.
Yeah, create a more fluid market. Yeah.
And I think it's a great opportunity for startups. I'll say this right now. Like, I think there's going to be a lot of startups that are going to come out of this ruling that are going to launch a la carte services, leveraging AI to make these services available direct to consumers without needing an agent. And they're going to be pretty compelling services and they're going to show up real fast.
I mean, a lot of people will not list their home or sell it because that 6% might put them underwater. So if it's now down to 2 or 3,
Totally.
yeah, people might be like,
It's always been crazy to me that anyone would pay a percent of absolute value. It makes no sense. I bought a home for $1 million. I'm selling it for $1.1 million. So I've made $100,000 profit, but I got to pay $60,000 of my total gross to an agent to sell it for me.
Yeah, 60% of the profit goes to them.
I just gave up 60% of my profit on my home.
Right.
It makes no sense.
And the crazy thing is that a bad sale of your home would be, let's call it 900,000 or $1 million, and a great sale would be 1.2. So
exactly,
there's a very small margin where they actually have an impact based on the quality of their effort, but they get compensated for the whole thing.
Yeah, for the whole thing.
They
no
should
matter
get
what.
compensated.
No matter the
It
outcome.
should be that you get a flat rate, $10,000 at $1 million, and then you get 10% over $1 million or something. You could give, just like you might with a salesperson.
The incentive comp should be variable based on performance, whereas the guaranteed part of the comp should be, like you said, a flat fee. It's kind of like a salesperson has an OTE, right? They got like a base and variable.
Yeah. I mean, you could say, if you said 1% up to $1 million, so that's 10K, and then 10% for the next 100K, and then 20% for the next 100K. So you would, that 1.2 million is really hard to get. Yeah, I'll give you 20% of that incremental 100. That would be a much better deal. You would be getting paid for the actual performance. So anyway, really interesting.
But Jake, I have an idea for the National Association of Realtors.
Oh, here we go.
If they want to stop being perceived as an evil monopolist, all they got to do is put out a cringe ad talking about the environment. Everyone's going to love them again.
Absolutely. They should do an ad where they have a diverse cast of people, and that diverse cast could talk about like putting sustainable forestry around it.
All I got to do is say something landfills. Everyone will love them again. They can charge 6%.
Absolutely. Virtue signaling, right? They can
something landfills.
Yes, absolutely. All right, let's keep the train moving here.